Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to LSE. I think many of you are studying here or here already, but welcome nonetheless. My name is Emma McCoy and I am the Vice President and Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education here at LSE. Now, of course, our guest today really doesn't need an introduction. We've already seen the video apart from anything else, but we are unbelievably grateful that he's taken the time out of his busy schedule to come and spend some time with us and, in fact, joined by his family as well, which is fantastic. So Stelios Haji-Ioannou, I've heard that Sir Stelios doesn't mind just being referred to by his first name, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, well, I'm going to stick with the Sir Stelios. We saw that Stelios was knighted in 2006, and I think that that's something that we really should celebrate. So Sir Stelios founded easyJet in 1995. As you saw, and in fact went on to build the Easy brand into one of Europe's most recognisable consumer brand. It spans, as you've seen, there's a list of the top 100, but you've got Easy Hotel, Easy Gym, Easy Storage, even Easy Bet. There's unbelievable number of brands under the kind of Easy brand and so much more. Alongside building the Easy family of brands through Easy Group, Sir Stelios has also become one of Britain, and I would say even broader than Britain, really a global significant philanthropist as the founder of the Stelios Philanthropic Foundation. And really importantly, a signatory of the Giving Pledge, which I think has around 250 or so signatories. And that really is a commitment to donate significant amounts of wealth to philanthropic causes. In fact, the foundation has given more than £100 million to organisations and initiatives in the countries where Stelios has, as you've noted, where Stelios and his family have lived. Now, Stelios, as many of you will know, is an LSE alumnus, having graduated in 1987 when the campus was a very different place with a BSc in economics, and he's been a long-standing supporter and champion of the school. Indeed, the LSE Stelios scholarships are really one of our most longest-standing scholarship. How would I say it? The scholarship, the number of years we've been given, that Sir Stelios has given to scholarships kind of probably outstrips many of our other scholarship schemes. We've got 20 years worth of students. I think it's over 160 students that have been supported. We've been joined by many of them today, including some alumni of the scheme itself. And that's, I think that commitment to LSE education makes a huge difference. I mean, we're really deeply grateful for your continued support to our students. And we're really delighted today to welcome you to this student event, in fact. So what's going to happen this afternoon is that we'll have a fireside chat led by two of our students, Jack Murray and Tom Gould. They're going to guide the conversation, and after that, we'll open the floor to questions from the audience.
Well, Sir Stelios, welcome back to the old theatre. We were joking before that this might be the one building that probably hasn't changed since you were an economics undergraduate here in the mid-1980s. You've credited one line from those years, "There's no such thing as a free lunch," with inspiring one of easyJet's most famous decisions, charging for coffee on board. What other lessons did you take from your studies at LSE, and what do you remember most vividly about your time here?
First of all, I'm really honored to be back. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for reaching out and organizing this at relatively short notice. Thank you for so many of you being here, because I understand it's exams time, isn't it? So we had to compete with people trying to prepare for exams and sit at exams and everything else. So thank you for being here. I've been to the school off and on. I mean, remember, I arrived here 42 years ago. So I was 17. Now I'm pushing 60. So 42 years ago, I think the only thing that hasn't changed at all is the Wright's bar. That was my first instinct. That dingy coffee shop on the left. I don't think the seats at the old theatre have changed either. I don't know if they've done one upholstering, maybe, but I think in the first of all, I remember I was growing up in Athens, and I was going through Greek education, normal Greek high school, and something possesses me at the age of 14, 15 to say, no, I'm not going to stay into the Greek educational system. I'm going to go to London and study at the London School of Economics. And I don't know what it is about the LSE brand that it makes it so powerful and strong in certain parts of the world, including Greece. But, in parallel to my Greek high school, I took private lessons for A-levels. In those days, it was A-level economics and A-level maths and O-level English, I think, to get in, because my English was not my mother tongue, obviously. I had to learn better English. And, I was, I was in awe when I first arrived here at the age of 16 or something to see what it's like and, find out how do you get in and how do you get your results. And then I will never forget the first day that I arrived as a student. I sat somewhere in that row at the back. And we listened to the speech of the director. It was a Mr. Patel, I think, the director in 84, something like that. I asked ChatGPT or something. That's what he told me. So, I was sitting right there, and the rest is history. I had good 3 years here. Then I did a master's degree in shipping because I was the son of a Greek shipping magnate, and I thought that that's what I would do for the rest of my life, which actually proves that you have no idea what you're going to do for the rest of your life. So I did a shipping degree, and then I sort of started a business. I started a shipping company. Then I went to my father and I asked him to fund my dream of creating a brand. And I know you asked me a specific question about the no free lunch, but that's the long-winded answer. So I think talking about what motivates young people, I think I wanted to prove myself to my father and the rest of the world that I wasn't just a rich daddy's boy, that I could prove myself in an industry that he knew nothing about, and in a sector that he knew nothing about, which is brand building. Greek shipping people make a lot of money by predicting markets and taking risks and doing things like that. But it's a B2B industry. So they don't build brands. They're not sort of marketing people. They don't understand how to build a brand. And I was determined that, I had the delusion that I was good at marketing. And I said I should try and build a brand. And starting an airline is a very good way of building a brand. I mean, there is something about airlines and flying and going on holiday and being excited that makes the airline you've flown with memorable. So the question was what sort of airline I was going to create. And that comes to the no free lunch. And the other point, which is the elasticity of demand. So how many of you have studied economics as such? Okay, more than half in the room. Excellent. So at the time, I was researching the airline industry to see if there is a profitable business model. I mean, airlines are notoriously unprofitable. Too many of them started, went bust. We had one role model, if you like, Sir Freddie Laker. How many of you remember him? I don't know, but he's the one who tried and failed because basically British Airways pushed him out of business. And he sued and he won compensation and everything else. So that was, prototype number one, if you like, went out of business, made his name by suing for unfair competition. And then Branson had started by that stage, which is the other example, if you like, I had of brand extension. How do you take a brand from one industry to the other? How do you make it famous? So I had some discussions with Branson. They were flying a single Airbus 320 between Athens and London under a franchise model by a Greek company, and they asked me for investment. And I looked at it, and although the business class on that flight was more suited to my lifestyle at the time, I said no to it. I said, this is not the way to make money in the airline industry. And I went to the States, and I visited Boeing. So the mecca, if you like, of the aviation industry is Boeing, the factory in Seattle where planes are made and everything else. So I walked in there, I sort of kicked the tires of the plane. I said, how much for one of these? They said, $30 million. Okay, let me think about it. And then I asked Boeing, what do you think makes money in this industry? And they told me, go and fly Southwest Airlines. And that's really the original idea. That's the original low-cost airline that started in the United States about a decade before me. So by that time, they were relatively well-established, 10-year-old company making money and everything else. And they were known as peanut airlines because the only thing they were giving for free on board was peanuts. So given the fact that I remember sitting in this theater and learning about, was it Milton Friedman, the economist, who said no such thing as a free lunch?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got that right. So Milton Friedman from Chicago, isn't it? Yeah, University of Chicago taught us that there is no such thing as a free lunch. If someone is offering you a free lunch, you want something in return, okay? Remember that in your life. So I said, why should we give anything away? Because there's debates that it shouldn't be peanuts, shouldn't be premium peanuts, nice peanuts, whatever. So I said, nothing is for free. Not even the soft drink. So the first people in the world who flew an aeroplane with passengers and said, everything you want on board is for sale. It sounds trivial today. Sounds commonplace, isn't it? That's what you do. So sorry for those European travelers that have spoiled their free lunches. It's all my fault. So one lesson from the LSE was no free lunch. The other was this elasticity of demand business, okay? So I never forget, I used the graph and I drew the demand curve that is downward sloping from top left to bottom right. And I said, how do we capture everybody under this curve? In other words, there's someone who's willing to pay £9, someone who's willing £19, someone who's willing to £29, and someone who's going to pay £119. So how do you capture everybody? And you set certain rules and you say, I'm going to sell the cheapest seat first, and the price goes up as the plane fills. And that's why the least price sensitive people are going to pay the most at the last minute. And the other dimension of price elasticity is obviously if there is a big event somewhere, a football match, or the Monaco Grand Prix if you're going to the south of France, then you can charge a premium for those few flights that take you to that event and bring you back. And then on a cold, idle Tuesday at 7 a.m. from Luton Airport to Aberdeen, you probably have to give the seats away because not many people want to be on that flight. But, some people do. And that's why there is one price for going to Aberdeen from Luton at 7 a.m. on a cold Tuesday. And there's another price for going to Nice at Friday night, the night before the Monaco Grand Prix. And that's the other lesson from the LSE. So not bad for 3 years here. Remember, until then, airlines were charging only two fares, business class and economy. And that was it. And nobody thought of having these rules of changing the price dynamically and saying, the systems were not geared to do it. That's why it's easier to do it in a startup. Yeah. If you're starting with a clean sheet of paper, you say, these are the rules. Every change costs money. So it's an ancillary service to change the flight. A name change is an ancillary service. So you pay to change the name of someone traveling, and so on and so forth.
Thank you for that overview, Stelios. You touched a little bit on your father, who was a very successful shipping tycoon. I've heard before that at the dinner table was where you spoke business and learned a lot from your successful father. Could you maybe touch on a couple stories that you learned from your father, and then maybe a couple of things that actually you saw your father do and thought, I'm not going to do that when I start my own business?
Well, my father is no longer with us, so it's easier for me to talk now about my father and his business. But I think I've learned a lot from him, but I've also learned about how to do things differently, if you like. So I've learned both ways from him and how to do it the other way, away from his practices. My father was a great cost cutter. He was really cost conscious, and he taught me things like you have to have a procurement department, and you have to take 3 bids before you buy anything, and you have to negotiate with suppliers, and all of these good things that make companies efficient at buying, at spending money. He didn't understand about brand building, so he was never worried about brand building, but he made most of his money by timing markets. So that's the skill set in that industry. When do you buy? When do you sell? And we live in the middle of a disruption at the moment that is making some people in shipping money, if you like. So, the disruption with the Iran war, some people are profiting from it. So if you are positioned in the right place with the right ship at the right time, you make money, and then too many people build ships, and then you lose money, and some people exit the industry, and so on and so forth. So I think his skill was timing. but they were also taking operational risks. Sending ships in the Persian Gulf during a war has operational risks, which I'm not into taking now. I'm at a stage in my career and my life that I'm not interested in taking such risks. But the idea of being cost conscious, of buying well, of negotiating well, is what I learned from him. And then I try to avoid, operational risks and war risks and, this constant game of trying to time the market. I don't know. I mean, if you paid attention to the video, what I've created with this, by the way, on the way out, I encourage you to take a copy of the book, and it's sitting at the table outside. But this is the easy history, the last 32 years, including a section about the foundation. So the LSE is mentioned here in the foundation section. But what I've created with this brand is a recurring, steady income stream. I think I was trying to avoid this boom-bust scenario of the shipping business, that 1 year you make a lot of money, the next 3 years you lose it all and you start again, and only the clever ones that can time the entry and the exit make money. So I said, how do I set up a business model that makes money every month? It might be a small amount of money, a steady income stream that is steady and you can rely on it. And that's why I created this royalty scheme, basically. easyJet is a big company, but it has a lot of ups and downs, and now it's at the difficult phase because the oil price has doubled. So all of a sudden, 30% of your cost base has increased by, let's say 50%, to be kind, on average. So you have to find another 15, 20% from your customers to pay you to end up with the same bottom line result. But I said, I'm not going to be 100% shareholder of easyJet. Other people have invested in it. Other people have a say. Other people run it. All I want is a steady income stream from every ticket sale. So every time you fly easyJet and you pay £100, Easy Group collects 25 pence into Easy Group. So 25 basis points of the revenue comes into Easy Group, which I now use to fund the work of the Stelios Foundation. So if you like, the scholarships of the LSE are paid by the royalties from flying easyJet and staying Easy Hotel and everything else. So it's a very good, virtuous circle, if you like. A recurring income stream that funds the giving back to society. And, that's what I tried to create. That's what I ended up with. Be careful what you wish for. It may happen to you.
Excellent. Aviation, as you've mentioned, is notoriously unforgiving. Richard Branson, who you know, famously said, if you want to be a millionaire, start with $1 billion and launch an airline. So I guess you mentioned you came from shipping, and that's already a very capital-intensive, tough industry. Why did you decide to start an airline, and what did you say to your father to convince him to fund the endeavor?
So all of that happened at a lunch in Monaco, because we're living in Monaco. My father moved from Greece, moved the family office to Monaco in 1990. So we're now in 1994. I started the shipping company. Nobody was giving me credit for it. And I said, is your father really telling you what to buy and what to sell? So I had this lunch and I said, if you give me 5 million, I think I can lease some planes and launch an airline. And I think it would be famous. Everybody will be talking about it. And I think that's what, that's how I sold him to it. He had enough of, people not knowing what he did for a living. And he said, if my son can go and build a famous brand, why not? And the initial investment was relatively small for his overall net worth. So it was a fair bet, if you like. So for my father, it was a step up in reputation, if you like, in fame. And a manageable risk, investment. We'll see how it goes. Then obviously the numbers got bigger. We bought some new planes, and then that's why I floated on the stock market, because that's when it becomes too big and you have to share the risk with others. Now, I'm not sure net Branson, whether he has made money of aviation or lost money. He's probably made money. He's one of the few people that have made money. I think easyJet overall has made money, but there are some incredible ups and downs. This morning I visited the crew at the crew base in Luton Airport. So I went back to, if you like, the spiritual home of the Easy brand, where the crew pick up the instructions and go out and fly the aircraft from Luton. And I was very pleased to see some people who were there 30 years ago. So there are a dozen people or so that are still there. The The thing that worried me at the beginning, for example, of easyJet was, God forbid, an accident. Because there was an airline called ValueJet in the States that started with old aircraft, took some risks, had an accident, and went out of business, basically. So I've always been, if you like, obsessed with, safety first. If you think safety is expensive, try an accident. That's another great expression I like. I was always emphasizing the need for remaining safe. And touch wood, easyJet has a unblemished safety record, 100%. I think the total cumulative number of people who've flown easyJet without a fatal accident is 1.2 billion. So 1.2 billion people in the last 30 years have flown safely with easyJet. And longer may continue. I mean, technology is much better nowadays. Remember, the machines are much better. They have a lot more automation. A lot of the accidents that happened 20, 30, 40 years ago are now avoided with technology. But the thing that nearly killed the airline was COVID. I mean, I couldn't write that in a business plan. I don't think my first business plan on easyJet had a risk factor COVID. I didn't even know what COVID was. So here you are in 2020 in March, and an airline with 340-something aircraft grounds this fleet for 3 months. So that is scary. But we survived. And one of the reasons we survived is because the company scaled back a bit on the capital expenditure and it raised money from the stock market. So again, it shows you the importance of sharing the risk with others. If easyJet was a small private airline, it would have got closed down. But having access to the capital markets is what kept it going. What's the original question?
To go back and check.
You start as a billionaire and then you...
I guess you mentioned COVID, and really the ultimate existential threat for an airline is that it can't fly. We're in a moment now where you're seeing a lot of disruption in the airline business. Oil price has gone up a lot, but jet fuel price has actually risen significantly more than the Brent crude price. Spirit Airlines has filed for bankruptcy and profits again across the industry under pressure. How do you see this playing out? And do you think the low-cost carrier model is under pressure at the moment?
Well, I'll tell you what the chief executive of easyJet told me and the crew this morning in the crew room. So he doesn't, this is Kenton Jarvis. So he said, we don't expect fuel shortages. So a lot of that at the moment seems to be scaremongering by the media. I mean, at the best of times, the visibility for aviation fuel supply is no more than 6-7 weeks anyway. So it can't be a guarantee. But at the moment, as an industry player, they're saying we don't see any cancellations because of fuel shortages. The doubling of the cost of aviation fuel is real. The question is, how long will it stay there? So if you can tell me how long will take Donald Trump to stop the war, then I'll tell you what is the impact on the profits of the airline industry. By the way, can I crack a joke? I've told that joke 3 or 4 times today. I love it. You all know what EBITDA is, isn't it? Earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. Yeah. So there's a new definition of EBITDA now. Is earnings before Iran, tariffs, and Donald announcements. So before Donald announcements, we're going to be okay. After Donald announcements, who knows? But, I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on American politics. I'm not an American, so it's kind of difficult for me to predict that. But at some stage, there will be public pressure to end the war. I mean, I think what hits the American consumer more than anything else, the average person driving in their car in Texas, is the price of the gasoline they put in their car. And that has doubled. So in the same way that it hurts easyJet, it hurts the average American driving around in Texas. So these people will start putting pressure on their government to, keep this short.
And I guess just kind of going off your joke there, we can tell that you as a CEO and just yourself has a great personality. And at one point, Fly on the Wall had, I believe it was the 3rd most weekly views after Coronation Street and EastEnders, which is pretty incredible. Most CEOs in your position haven't and wouldn't launch a TV show and have that much kind of publicity and exposure. Why was it that you decided to do this, and how much do you think this contributed to easyJet's success?
one of my colleagues, Tony Anderson, is here in the room, and he keeps reminding me of the story that when ITV approached us to film this, again, there are some young people in the room, so I should explain from scratch what it is. So in 1997, when the airline was 2 years old, there was a TV format called docu-soap. So documentary and soap opera combined, making stars of everyday people. So how do you take a cabin crew member or a check-in agent at an airport and you make them national TV stars? And the answer is you install TV cameras in the airport and you wait for things to go wrong, and then you film them. And, you know, there's cancellations and complaints and all of that. And that makes interesting television. So it was a series called Airline. So that was the name. It was launched by ITV. And before the fragmentation of the audiences, because now with YouTube and streaming and Netflix, it's very difficult to get to those numbers. But at the peak of its popularity, it was, as you said, the third most popular program on British television, attracting audiences of 13 million people every Friday night. So 13 million people tuned in every Friday to watch people complaining about their flight being late. You know. From my perspective, I had nothing to lose. I mean, all my executive says, don't do it. It's too much risk. We'll be ridiculed. Nobody would ever fly with us again. And I said, we're going to do it anyway. And the result is, I think the brand emerges stronger at the other end because people are interested and they remember the brand and they feel empathy for the crew, the staff. I mean, I'll never forget, there's this guy that forgot his passport. So he's filmed in Luton Airport complaining that he cannot get on a flight without his passport. And he says, I know I forgot my passport, but that's your fault. So you have to let me on the plane.
Going on to competition, you've got the opportunity to meet some of the best entrepreneurs in the airline business, such as Richard Branson, who seemed like more of a hero to you. And then also Michael O'Leary, who seemed like more of a rival. Could you maybe touch on your kind of like encounters with these other titans and what you learned from them?
Well, clearly the idea of brand extension came by observing Branson. So I openly admit that he started first and then I followed. The difference is, I think his brand is entertainment based, sort of, if you like, lifestyle and luxury and expensive. And we created a value for money brand. Now, the amazing thing about Ryanair is that, and Michael O'Leary personally, is that he found a way of making a lot of money, not caring about his brand, but caring about the bottom line. So, again, you have to give credit to someone who's created so much shareholder value. I think my personal opinion of Michael O'Leary is that he's a very good operator, and all this rhetoric is there to keep the expectations of the customers down and to keep the costs down. So, you promise people nothing, and they get nothing, and it works, and you don't have to, And he even made some exaggerated statements like, I'll make you fly standing up, and you have to pay for going to the loo. You remember those? Which he never implemented, by the way. Neither of these two things were implemented, but they're good PR stunts. They're good, of communicating to his own staff and his customers that Ryanair is going to be, the lowest cost, very basic product and a service, and don't expect anything different. So, and don't get me wrong, he's made more money than easyJet. So if you look at the market cap of Ryanair, it's bigger. So you have to give him credit for it. He wasn't the founder. Remember, he was actually an accountant by training, KPMG accountant that was hired by Tony Ryan, the original founder, that brought him in to fix the problem. Remember that the airline was called Ryanair after Tony Ryan, and I nearly called my airline Stellair after my name. So I'm glad I didn't make that mistake. I changed the branding strategy for being about me, being egocentric, to being about the values of the brand. So easy is what I wanted people to remember. And that's how you end up with an iconic brand like this. I mean, again, in the book, there is a replica of the napkin. I think I was sitting in a bar in London and I said, what shall we name this airline? So I started Stel Air, Stel Jet or whatever. Then I crossed it out. And then I said cheap jet. And then I said affordable jet, light jet or whatever. And then easy. And I said, this is it. And we're going to call it easy. I don't think the rivalry with Ryanair is that much nowadays. I think, both companies have grown up, there is not that much overlap in the routes in reality. So when the companies were smaller and there were few routes available, obviously there was a bit more competition. But now both companies have found enough market share of their own. easyJet is mostly in bigger airports. Ryanair is mostly in smaller airports. That's why they have on average a lower cost base, but you fly further away from the destination. So they found their business models, yeah.
Yeah. And British Airways famously launched Go, which was a direct rival to easyJet at the time. It was kind of their budget airline. Could you maybe touch a little bit on the rivalry there and maybe some of the stunts you pulled that actually kind of propelled easyJet?
Yeah, you may have noticed it in the video again, but again, this is one of our most iconic PR stunts, if you like. So there was a chief executive in British Airways called Bob Ayling that had this idea that they should launch a rival low-cost airline in order to sort of push us out of business, if you like. So how do you stop the growth of this new business model? Well, you create something similar, and I would say they will try to push them out of business and then shut it down. But for me, the launch of Go was, again, a PR gift, because the biggest problem I had as a marketer was, how do you convince people this is safe? It costs half the money. So is it half as safe? I mean, what does it mean? How do you achieve that? So the biggest gift was the fact that British Airways said, no, it's a safe model because we can copy it, basically. We can replicate it. So that's why we use the opportunity to say, we are the original, they are the copycats, they are trying to push us out of business, you should protect us, you should support us. And famously, we bought 10 tickets on the first flight, we put on orange bowler suits and went and boarded the flight and gave them free tickets. So the launch of Go became more of a publicity stunt for easyJet than the other way around. And eventually what happened, another frightening moment in the aviation industry, do you remember September 11th? I mean, September 11th grounded the American airline industry for the best part of a week. There was nothing flying in the US for a week. And for months thereafter, people were afraid to fly and, terrorism and, can it spread elsewhere? And British Airways was a company flying into New York, obviously flying into the States. And therefore, they're more severely affected than easyJet. And then in the process, in order to restructure, they sold Go to a private equity company. And then easyJet bought Go from the private equity company. So we ended up.
So you won in the end.
Yeah, in the end, we bought them and integrated them into easyJet.
And you've said the best idea, the best business you've had was launching the airline, but your second best idea was keeping the brand. And you separated the IP from the operating company at the IPO. Was this always your goal, or what was the motivation behind that decision?
The motivation was to create these steady income streams. It was to separate the two businesses, the volatile, cyclical business from the steady income stream. Again, split-second decision the night before the flotation. I had hired UBS and Credit Suisse. Anybody remembers Credit Suisse? A venerable investment bank that no longer around. And sat down with UBS and Credit Suisse. I said, I'll let you buy 25, and I'll let your investors buy 25% of my company if you let me keep the brand outside. So it was as simple as that. They said yes, and the rest is history. So, they could have said no, and then I would have said, okay, I'll take the brand with it or something. Like Tony Ryan did. Tony Ryan never kept the Ryanair brand in his own company. He sold it with his company.
And so going on to a little bit about your philanthropy that you've talked a little bit about, we're very grateful that some of the Stelios scholars are here in the audience today. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what advice you'd give to a student or a younger person today, especially navigating like quite a uncertain world with geopolitics and AI at the moment?
What advice would I give to current students?
In your position, kind of 30, 40 years ago?
Well, you confuse me now. What advice would I give myself 40 years ago or today's student? Let's focus on today's
Let's
students.
focus on today's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is if you are at a good university like this one, I think you should continue with your studies. You know, don't do a Mark Zuckerberg or, skip university because you're going to launch Facebook, because you may not launch Facebook. So stick with your studies, get a good degree, go on to further education if you think it's appropriate. I think the best age to start a business is 27, 28. Before, you don't know enough. If you leave it until much later, you probably never do it because you appreciate the risks and therefore it's too late. In judging what business I would invest today and where do I extend the brand, I would go into asset-light tech businesses. I mean, there is something very visible about big assets like jets and hotels and things like that. But I prefer businesses that are asset-light, that use technology, they're not likely to face technical obsolescence. So try and embrace AI. I mean, I'm not a big user of AI. I mean, I've only signed up to ChatGPT a few months ago, but I can see it's a powerful tool. And I think every new business should try and find an angle how to use it. I mean, my best guess is big businesses will use it to save costs. For example, customer service. easyJet uses 2,000 people, I think, in customer service. Can you use AI to do the same customer service with, half the people or something? I don't know, but it will take time. And that's where you scare people as well. You only talked about redundancies and job cuts coming out of AI. I think every technological evolution, including the internet itself 20 years ago to 25 years ago, has in reality increased efficiency and productivity rather than result in redundancies. So I wouldn't be scaremongering and saying, you'll all lose your jobs. But embrace technology, try and find an asset-light, tech-driven business, and try it. I mean, there are a lot of people that keep asking for consultancies and, things like that. I mean, sometimes it's just easier to try something and see if it works. And I've done a lot of things that didn't work, and that's the point. You test it, you find it doesn't work, and you move on, or you change it. So trial and error is probably one of the best ways to see what works in entrepreneurship. If you never failed, you never taken enough risk. If everything you've ever done has worked, you haven't taken enough risk. I mean, something else I tell people nowadays is I split my working time in 3 parts. So the easy family is 1/3. Then I invest in a diversified set of investments on the stock market. So well-diversified, change-traded funds, and I use options to buy and sell and create income. So that's about 1/3. And that's my steady sort of diversified source of income. And then the last third is giving back to society. And it takes time. Giving back to society is time consuming. You've heard about the scholarships because we're here, but maybe I can talk about some of the other ways we give back. So I give back by supporting entrepreneurs. I'm a great believer that entrepreneurship is a great creator of wealth. And if you want to help people create new businesses, startups, they create wealth for themselves and their employees and their customers and everything else. And so we have 7 different programs of helping entrepreneurs in the 6 countries where I've lived and worked. Then at the other end of the spectrum, we give money to people in need. So we help the brightest, the entrepreneurs who go and create wealth, to the neediest. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Trussell Trust here in the UK, the food banks, the Trussell Trust. Yeah. So we give food to the Trussell Trust to give to people who go to a food bank. So the other end of the spectrum. And we do the same in Athens, in Cyprus. So my perspective on that problem is that my fortune is not big enough to solve the hunger of the world everywhere. There might be needier people in the middle of Africa, but if there are people starving in my birthplace in Athens, I'd rather start by helping them. So organizing all of that takes about 1/3 of my time. One of the reasons I'm here is because I see it as giving back. It's good to talk to students and inspire them.
And what do you think motivated or what was it that made you decide to make philanthropy such a big aspect of your life and giving away money?
Another one of my favorite expressions is that most of us spend most of our working life creating the second sentence in our obituary. So I'm sorry if it sounds a bit morbid, but basically most of us have the first sentence written about us. So I'll be the founder of easyJet. Very difficult to change that. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States from that year to that year. The question is what comes after that. So what people would put in the second sentence of your obituary. And I decided many years ago, I think when I was turning 40, that I wanted the second sentence to be something about he was a great philanthropist. He wanted to help people and he helped people. So once you created the source of wealth, I think it's about giving back to society. And that's why my foundation has a perpetual mandate. In other words, you mentioned the giving pledge, but the point is that I don't want to give away half my fortune. I want to endow it into a foundation that would invest it and then spend the income in order to live forever. Most Greeks believe we are going to live forever, but we're not going to live forever. But a foundation can live forever. If it's well endowed and well structured and has the right governance, and it has enough money, it can live forever and will perpetuate the Stelios, the legacy, my legacy forever. And I think that would be a good achievement. Are risky, which means one day they may go out of business. Let's not forget that. I mean, there are very few. How old is the LSE? 100 and something years old?
130.
130.
Last year.
130. So the LSE is an example of an institution that's been around 130 years. There are not many for-profit businesses that have survived that long, because businesses are designed to take risk, and occasionally they fail. Think about it. It has happened. Huge names in industry and business have gone out. So I like the idea of leaving a legacy to do with philanthropy rather than for profit.
Excellent. And maybe you'll hand over to some audience questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a number of hands. Before I do that, I'm going to take a bit of a chair's kind of prerogative and say that the last time I spoke to Stelios, he said the one thing that he wouldn't be branding would be kind of easy university. Having been to the LSE, and I know I speak for all the students here, it's a fairly tough place to be. And for those of you that are about to enter exams, you may be thinking, oh my goodness, this is tough. But I think you'll have seen from how Stelios has spoken today, a lot of that education that you get here goes on and makes you be able to make really informed decisions about really tough problems later on. That's my plug as VP Education. So I guess we're going to be on the kind of tricky university. And I think a lot of Stelios's points clearly come from a really amazing understanding of kind of economics and how to solve complex problems, which is what we do day to day. And I am just so pleased that you're funding all of our scholars, but also speaking so positively about university education at a time when I think it's kind of under threat. So thank you for that. So now, questions. So I think we have some, and I'm going to go at the front in the green. Do we have any mics? Here we go. If you could just say your name and then ask your question, that would be great.
Lydia Khan from Rightful Action. Stelios, when you and I met in 2007, I was a banker at UBS, and you were in the middle of your philanthropy conversations. And what I remember was your kindness and your curiosity. Are there other qualities that you would advise a social entrepreneur, which is, yes, you're a straight out make money entrepreneur, but I think you're also a social entrepreneur because you change systems. Are there any other qualities you'd recommend?
I guess it goes back to this point. Don't be afraid to take risks, calculated risks. Don't take a risk you cannot afford to lose. So don't bet the farm, don't bet the house, don't take a risk that if it goes wrong, you cannot recover from it. But size your investments and see how much risk you can afford to take. And, I've tried many things. That's the point. You have to try 100 things to see which 50 work. It's that sort of thing. And don't be afraid to change if it doesn't work. There's nothing wrong with changing course and changing business model and so on and so forth. So, and, try and be a force for good. In other words, to change for the better. So, I didn't set out to make flying more expensive. There are people who actually have business model like that. Let's set up an amazing airline and charge a fortune for flying business class and we'll make money. I mean, the most incredible business about luxury is LVMH. It's incredible how big they've become in selling so many things at very, very high prices and finding enough people to buy from them. So maybe that's a skill the French people have. I don't know. But Hermès, I mean, another legendary name that keeps charging more for their bags and everything else.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to go in the yellow jumper just here.
Speak up a bit because the microphone doesn't work.
Thanks very much for sharing your insights. I'm very grateful to work with you. I'm Daniel from Imperial College. I'm starting 2 startups, one in fashion, one in Lego design, and I wanted your advice. What would you say would be the most important thing for rapid growth versus sustained
growth? Growth comes with risk. So it goes back to how much risk can you afford to take. Again, we have to all recognize our strengths and weaknesses, but there are some entrepreneurs out there that are much better than me at getting people to fund their ambitious growth plans. So some of the biggest fortunes in America particularly are from entrepreneurs that have convinced the investors, the stock market, some private, some public, to fund these hugely ambitious growth plans. So again, I don't have that skill. You know, people invest in my companies because they want to make profits immediately, not, jump tomorrow. But there are, you have to give credit to people like Elon Musk that keep selling that dream that, one day I'll be selling robotaxis and they will be making a lot of money. So, if you have that skill, use it.
Right, who's next?
Yeah.
In the green polo shirt. That's right, yeah.
Sir Stelios, thank you so much for attending. LSE, thank you so much for hosting. I'm Jamil Uddin, founder of DoingIt.today, gamifying work, and it's going to change the world, as you're saying, gamifying work.
And
now,
never miss an opportunity to promote yourself and your business. Go ahead. Go ahead, man.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Give us the website again so we can go on.
DoingIt.today, gamifying work, improving productivity for all teams working across the board. We'll change the world for sure. But
.com, perfect.
.today, but thank you so much, sir. But around this conversation that you just talked about, now I found it very interesting for you're talking about in the early stages of getting user acquisition. It's about getting users to trust your brand, kind of making them feel at home in your brand, and it's a reliable brand. You talked about selling them these auxiliary services for a charge like peanuts, drinks, and being the first to kind of create that. How did you deal with perhaps the user perception of maybe easyJet is just trying to take my money per se, and obviously it's hugely successful today, so there's a formula you came up with. Thank you.
I mean, our biggest problem was attracting people who were not paying out of their own pocket when they're flying, because fundamentally the frills in the airline industry were introduced to look after business class passengers that were spending their employers' money. That's what the British Airways Club Class product is designed to do. Charge a lot of money to your employer, you get the benefit, you get the frills, you get the air miles, which we then use to go on holiday and everything else. So these people were the last people to fly easyJet. And even today, only 15%, I think, of the average of the total customers of easyJet fly and use their employer's money to pay for the ticket. So these were the least willing to change their habits. I think people spending their own money saw the deal very clearly from the beginning. It's 7 p.m. in the afternoon on a flight down to the Mediterranean. Maybe I am willing to spend money and buy a glass of champagne or a glass of wine and some crisps. 7 o'clock in the morning flight to Aberdeen, all I need is a coffee. I think people are best placed to make that trade-off. What are you willing to spend money on? How much are you willing to pay for? Is a purchased sandwich a better snack than a cheap airline meal on a tray for free? And most people would say, let me choose which sandwich I want to pay for and I'll buy for it. Or if I'm not hungry, I'm not going to buy it.
Quite brilliant. I think at the back in the denim, there you go.
Hello. Lovely to meet you, sir. My name is Hope Barama. I study a Master of Strategic Communication at the LSE. And I was very intrigued when you spoke about brands. because it's something I'm very interested in. And my question is, what has influenced your branding strategies over the years? And what would you say is the future of branding?
What's the future of branding? I mean, I'm not of that generation, but I think there is something about influencer marketing and all of that social media that I don't understand very well myself, but there's probably something there. A couple of our brands which are launched by entrepreneurs which are your age, literally, an astrology app, Easy Stars. So Easy Stars is using TikTok to find influencers to promote the concept of paying for an app to learn about your star sign. So there are niches like that I didn't know existed. I don't think ever myself I believed in astrology, but that's not the point. The point is, will you find enough people that are willing to pay a modest subscription to get, those of us who are older remember the column at the back of the newspaper that had your star sign, isn't it? So you used to buy the newspaper and get with that an astrology prediction about your life. So all of that is now done on an app, and it's done electronically, and it's promoted by influencers, comes on TikTok. So there's something about that. And another example, which is live at the moment, we've made a decision. You asked me about the Airline series in 1997. So now I was half asleep watching television the other day, about a year ago, and I saw a program called Storage Wars.
Seen that one.
Yeah, you said Storage Wars? Yeah. So it's about people storing their stuff and everything else. And I said, why can't we have this about easy storage? I mean, we have a business in the family, and, So I was interviewed by a presenter called Jake Humphreys, and he did a podcast with me, and then I asked him, how do you create these shows? Because they have a business that creates shows like that. So we came to an agreement, and we are funding as Easy Group an 8-minute what they call sizzle tape. So they're going to create a mini version of what a TV series can look like, and then you promote it on YouTube. I mean, the video you've seen has had 55 million views on YouTube in 4 months. So there is a way of promoting these things online now. When I was starting out, I thought the biggest accolade to be on a side of a London taxi, isn't it? That's what big brands do. They advertise on the side of a London taxi. Now, all of that is online. And most people are not watching ITV anymore. They're on YouTube. Modern marketing, take risks. We're basically going to create 8 minutes of a TV series, show it on YouTube, and hopefully one of the broadcasters would say, this is interesting television. We're going to commission more episodes.
So I'm going to go over on this now.
Hi, Sir Stelios. I'm a 2004 math and econ student, so I'm an alumni. I actually came to one of your talks when I was a student, and I found it incredibly energizing, obviously being a student then. And so when the alumni team invited me for this talk, I wanted to see with the benefit of time what your wisdom was now. My question is, what advice would you give to the next generation of entrepreneurs about how to build emotional and character resilience in the journey of being an entrepreneur?
To build?
Emotional and character resilience of being an entrepreneur. So what steadied your ship, to use the pun,
If you want to keep my answers short, I don't know. Remember, I don't pretend to be an expert on everything. So, the honest answer is I don't know.
That's true. Yeah. I'm a bit worried about time because we're probably now down to the last 2 minutes. Yeah. So I think I do want our kind of host to say a couple of words before we.
Well, it's been a true privilege to welcome you, Sir Stelios, back to LSE. I'm sure we're all going to come out of this with a lot of reflections and things to take away. And so we really appreciate your time. And more broadly, thank you for your continued support of the school. The Stelios scholars who are with us today are a testament to the difference that has made.
Shall we ask them to stand up and we give them a round of applause? Can the Stelios scholars stand up, please? Bravo, guys. Thank you for being here.
So thank you so much for taking the time today and for your continued support. Thank you, sir.